Trigger warning, this episode contains topics that may not be appropriate for all listeners.
What is the first thing you think about when you think of gay pride or LGBTQIA plus pride? What is the first thing that you think of?
So what I travel to is being raised in Alabama with conservative family and not fully understanding different sexuality rights for the majority of my life, to the point where I can openly say that at one point there was somebody that was running for some official thing. And I remember thinking, what does it matter that they are gay? Right. And looking back now, I'm like, girl, it's embarrassing. But the important thing about humanity is that we grow and we change and we pull ourselves out of ignorance at some point. And so a lot of my knowledge on gay rights, the movements and everything like that is very, very little in reality. Like, I know certain topics, but as far as the whole movement, I know nothing on the movement. What we have researched, that's my limiting. And then what I know in, as far as true crime and whatnot, but I know that there will probably not be justification for a lot of people that deserve it when it comes to being able to live a life. It's being part of the LGBTQ is about consent. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of misconstrued information comes about with, there's people that it's going to influence my children. It's going to change my children. My children are going to be affected. And in reality, it's like, that's not remotely close to what's actually happening. Like, you are the way that you are. And if your child is going to be gay or come out as part of, that a different sexuality than just heterosexual, that's something that's just a natural part of who they are. It's not about this person has done something that's criminal to children or that's criminal to this person or that person, unless there's actually a crime. But right. Being raised in Alabama, a lot of it is associated with really negative things that aren't true. Right. And so we just grow up being told these stories over and over. And now we're in a day where, like, there's more attention to it. And so maybe things will get better for the community. But, like, I can safely say that I just was raised not knowing all the facts, not knowing all the truth.
Right. And so you're not that different from a lot of people, especially when it comes to the history of the LGBTQIA plus community, and even more of a micro history on the Pride movement. Unless you're like our age, especially, people in the community, a lot of the people younger than us in the community don't really know the history. They don't know what we went through to get where we are today. They wake up with RuPaul, having a drag race. They wake up with celebrities just being able to come out and say, I'm trans, or I'm gay, or I'm bisexual. And there's not a lot of hate that comes with that anymore. And that's very recent in our history. Even as late as the 90s, celebrities were still staying in the closet because if they didn't, they would lose their jobs. Ellen was a very notable celebrity that came out in the 90s, and she lost everything. Granted, she's gotten it all back and then some now, but in the moment, she lost everything. Yeah. And so that's been a very big fear. And younger generations don't have that fear anymore. In school, perhaps, because children are vile and children are hateful. And, so there still may be some fear. And of course, parents, not all parents are understanding. So the entirety of the fear is gone. But there's a lot more access now. There's a lot more information now. And there's a lot more community now that's out in the open. But I guess I want to start our conversation with the Pride movement and where it started, and kind of, I can't talk about everything. We would be here for days, girl,
Right.
because there's a lot of history. So I'm not going to talk about all of it. And for those of us in a community that you feel as though I glanced over, your community's, contributions to the movement, I apologize. That is not my intent. I just know that Erica and I do not have weeks and weeks and weeks to talk about everything that I would want to talk about in this podcast for the Pride movement. However, I do want to talk about this idea that everyone, I don't want to say everyone, that's a very strong word. Many people believe that Stonewall and the riots that happened at Stonewall is what was the first riot, and it was the first rebellion. And that's not true. Stonewall was the most notable, but it was not the first, nor was it the only. So we're going to talk about pre-Stonewall a little bit, and then we're going to talk about Stonewall. Okay. So all the way back into World War II, there were gay rights and lesbian rights organizations. These were all a part of what's being called as the homophile movement, right? And the homophile movement refers to the local, national, international socio-political movement for gay and lesbian rights, which emerged following World War II. Many people consider the birth of the homophile movement to be sometime between 1950 and 1951. This corresponds to the times when certain organizations like the Medicine Society, I don't think I said that right, I'm from Kentucky, words are hard, and then eventually to an organization called One Inc. and the Daughters of Bilitis. Again, that's probably not how that word is said. I'll put the words on the screen. I'm from Kentucky and words are hard. Although the Mattachine Society has been frequently misidentified as the first U.S. gay rights organization, there were a number of groups that were probably more covert in nature that were already established decades before the Mattachine Society. U.S. gay rights organizations that predate the society include Chicago Society for Human Rights, which was founded by Henry Gerber in 1924. The Sons of Hamidi, again, I'm from Kentucky, that's probably not how that word is supposed to be said, which was established in the Midwest around 1934. The Legions of the Damned, which was around 1944 in Arizona, and the Veterans Benevolent Association, founded in New York in 1945. Before the era of Stonewall, there were, in the conservative estimate, of about 60 homophile or gay rights groups operating. According to NACHO, in the 1970s, there were 143 homosexual or gay groups operating in the United States and Canada. After Stonewall, these groups proliferated so rapidly it becomes difficult to keep track of how many there are.
Can I ask you a question?
What's that?
What does groups mean?
Groups?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by what does groups mean?
You said that there were groups. Does that mean that like a community, like with this
organization? I think a good word to use in place of groups would be organizations or communities. Oh, okay. Communities tends to be a very large group of people, right? So you have the LGBTQIA plus community, and within that community, they're broken down in groups.
Gotcha.
Or organizations. Some of them weren't organized so much, so that's why I use the word group.
I follow. I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Blah, 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 blah. However, just a year after Stonewall, there were upwards of about 2,000 LGBTQI plus liberation groups in the United States and many more internationally. While the term homophile eventually fell out of use, there were notably a number of organizations who continued to call themselves homophile groups all the way up until the 1980s. These groups would protest around the 4th of July celebration called the Reminder Day Picket, which was held at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, from the years 1967 and 1969. However, after Stonewall, the organizations that planned this annual demonstration turned their attention to planning the first Pride March, which took place in New York City in 1970. So there were a lot of support groups, protesting groups, picketing groups that dated all the way back to the 1920s. The first major movements started in the 1950s, right after World War II. But that wasn't the only like rebellions that were happening either. These were just protesting groups. Stonewall, as I said earlier, was not the first rebellion or riot, and nor was it the only one. In the 1960s, and preceding decades prior to that, was not a time that was welcoming for LGBTQIA plus people. Solicitation of same-sex relations was illegal in New York City, and solicitation isn't just prostitution. Just walking up to someone saying, "Hey, you're real cute." If you both were men, that interaction was illegal in New York City. And throughout a lot of the 60s, there were undercover cops that would entrap gay men into soliciting them and then arrest them. So that was a really big problem for LGBTQIA plus people within the 60s. For such reasons, LGBTQIA plus individuals flocked to gay bars and clubs, which were places of refuge where they could express themselves openly and socialize without worry. However, the New York State Liquor Authority penalized and shut down establishments that served alcohol to known or suspected LGBTQIA plus individuals, arguing that the mere gathering of homosexuals was disorderly. Thanks to activist efforts, these regulations were overturned in 1966, and LGBT plus people could then be served alcohol. But engaging in any gay behavior in public, which could be holding hands, kissing, or dancing with someone of the same sex, was still illegal. So police harassment of gay bars continued, and many bars still operated without liquor licenses, in part because they were owned by the mafia, and the mafia paid off the cops. We'll touch on that again in a moment. But the Stonewall riots of 1969 were arguably the most famous and impactful uprisings for the LGBTQIA plus community, but they were not the first. There were various smaller uprisings that predated Stonewall, some over a decade, to push back against harassment and often from police brutality and inequality. Going back to 1958 in Los Angeles, we have the Cooper Donuts riot. After nearby bars closed, a 24-hour Main Street donut cafe. So that must be Cooper Donuts. Excuse me. I'm from Kentucky and words are hard. Cooper Donuts riot. They were a 24-hour donut cafe, and in May in May in 1958, two cops checking IDs, which is a routine harassment, arbitrarily picked up two hustlers, two queens, and a young man just cruising and led them out. Novelist and one of the hustlers, John Reiki, said in his book, City of Night, the situation quickly devolved as angry bystanders began throwing debris and items from Cooper at the cops, who eventually retreated to their car. Disobedience turned into a riot, and soon enough, police backup arrived. The officers blocked part of Main Street for the night and arrested several of the rioters. There have been some confusion about actual location of the 1958 brawl, but Reiki clarified in a 2021 interview there was no riot at Cooper's. It was actually another donut shop, but at the time, people called every donut shop in the city Cooper's because there were so many. This particular one is gone now. Another notable riot was in 1961.
Oh, that was my chair. Sorry.
Do what?
My chair squeaked off my desk.
In 1961 in Milwaukee, Minnesota, something called the Black Night Brawl took place on October 5th. Four party-going sailors entered Black Night, a popular St. Paul Avenue gay bar in Milwaukee, on a dare. They started a fight with the bouncer, only to be chased out of the bar by gender non-conforming Black queens, one notably named Josie Carter, who knocked one of the men unconscious with the bottle. The men later returned with reinforcements and began to tear the bar apart, but were met with stiff resistance by bar patrons. The sailors were arrested, but the charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence. Fucking convenient. The bar suffered significant damage from the brawl and was eventually demolished for the extension of St. Paul Avenue. In 1965, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Dewey's Restaurant had a sit-in. It was on April 25th. The 17th Street location of Dewey's restaurant denied service to approximately 150 people who appeared to be gay or gender nonconforming. Three teenagers refused to leave and were later arrested, along with Clark Pollock, who is a leader of one of the homophile organizations called Janus Society, or Janus. Who knows? I'm from Kentucky. Also, this will be listed as a caption, so y'all know what the hell I'm saying. After he offered to help the group obtain a lawyer. The Janus Society members protested outside the restaurant for the next 5 days. On May 2nd, 3 more people staged to sit in at Dewey's. This time the protesters weren't arrested and instead left the restaurant voluntarily a few hours later. Dewey's agreed to stop denying service to LGBTQIA plus people shortly thereafter. In 1966, there was a sit-in at Julia's Tavern in New York City. In 1966, also was a Compton's cafeteria riot right outside of San Francisco. From the years 1966 and 1967, Black Cat Tavern was protested outside of Los Angeles. In 1968, the Patch Bar in Los Angeles was an LGBTQIA plus owned bar, and that was also a riot at that bar. So I could go into all of them if you want me to, but legitimately this was just to point out that Stonewall was not the first, nor was it the only. But the thing we have to realize is why Stonewall became so much more significant than these other riots in the first place. And so let's talk about what Stonewall was and what happened, right? So as you may or may not know, it happened at about 1:58 in the morning on the morning of June 28th in 1969. It was a routine bar called the Stonewall Inn, which when the Stonewall Inn was actually opened, it was kind of like a hotel restaurant for straight people. And when the mafia invested in it, it became a gay bar.
I think we should put a little black censor bar over your
On this night, it was one of the first wave of the gay pride movement in New York City. And we're going to talk about, gay rights versus gay pride here in a moment. It was located at 53 Christopher Street in the Greenwich Village. See, I know how this word is pronounced.
Greenwich.
Because I have friends from New York, and they said, you do not say Greenwich Village, it's Greenwich. Okay, so Greenwich Village, the bar became home to many of the society's outcasts, gay men, drag queens, transgendered folks, members of the mafia, hustlers, and homeless youth. At approximately 2 a.m., the New York Police Department arrived to clear out the bar. Initially, most patrons were cooperative. They left the bar as instructed and waited patiently as the police arrested several mafia members inside, right? Within just a few minutes, though, police began asking for identification. Female officers were escorting cross-dressers and drag queens and potentially transgendered women to the restrooms to verify their gender, which led to several more arrests. After seeing several gay men and women being arrested, the crowd gathered outside the bar and it became increasingly more agitated. As more patrol vehicles arrived, they began shouting at the officers, "Gay power, we shall overcome." People started throwing pennies and empty beer bottles at police vehicles. Inside the bar, some people were being beaten by the cops. One woman arrested was hit over the head by a police officer with a billy bat. She incited the crowd into action by asking them to do something. And within minutes, the raiding of Stonewall escalated into a full-blown riot. Side note, people that were there at this riot are asking it no longer to be called a riot because it wasn't. It was a rebellion. So, but it's called the Stonewall Riots, and I will continue referring to it as the riots, but let it be known that it was a rebellion and not a traditional riot. Before the infamous,
it doesn't seem like it was an unjust
right.
uprising. Yeah.
Before the infamous riot at Stonewall, police raids targeting gay bars were a commonplace occurrence. However, the Stonewall uprising was the first one to create such a powerful reaction. And this is where we start getting into why it's more notable and why it's more significant than the previous gay uprisings of the 50s and 60s. the Stonewall riot was the first one to create such a powerful reaction. The New York State Liquor Authority would often refuse to give liquor licenses to bars catering to gay customers. This is one of the reasons why gay bars were such an easy target for police. Oftentimes, unlicensed bars like Stonewall would attract mafia bosses who would pay off the cops in exchange for protection. They are suspecting that the mafia bosses did not pay for protection of this bar, which is why this bar got raided that night. Stonewall was unlike most NYC, New York City bars, in the fact that it was a preferred destination made it harder for patrons to give up. A large number of drag queens that frequented Stonewall were usually unwelcome to most other places. Stonewall also attracted those who could not afford to go to other, more expensive bars, as the entrance for the Stonewall at the time was only $3. Many youths that visited Stonewalls were runaway, and many of them were even homeless. They hung around Christopher Street, hustling or panhandling for money, and during the evening hours, they lived at Stonewall as if it was their home. During the 1960s, people had become aware of the culture of discrimination and intolerance that surrounded gays and LGBTQIA plus people. The African American civil rights movement was at its height, and the Vietnam War dragged on, even though it became increasingly unpopular. So we have civil resistance exhibited by many cultures that were disenfranchised, all at the same time.
It was just a volatile time.
Right. So these civil resistances encouraged many to become more outspoken. The rich political climate gave power to people whose marginalized voices needed to be heard, and was one of the many reasons that Stonewall raid eventually turned into a riot. Within a year of the event, 2 gay rights organizations were formed, and in 1970, several gay pride parades took place in major cities around the country. This organized activism started to lead to several other important developments and advances for the global LGBTQIA plus community. In 2016, President Barack Obama named the Stonewall Inn as the country's first national monument to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights. It would not be possible for us to identify every individual involved in the Stonewall riots, but several stand out as notable and representative of them all. The following individuals participated in the Stonewall riots and have left a lasting impact on the LGBTQIA plus community as a whole. Virginia Apuzzo, David Courtier, Stormy, this was probably a drag queen, Stormy DeLavarriere, Williamson L. Henderson, Brenda Howard, Miss Major Griffin Gacy, Jerry Hoos, Miss Marsha P. Johnson, Thomas Lanyon Schmidt, Richard Leitch, Sylvia Rivera, Craig Rodwell, Doric Wilson. Now, every year on the last Sunday in June, New York City celebrates Gay Pride. It's one of the most heavily participated and attended parades in New York, exceeded only by the St. Patrick's Day Parade. The Stonewall event marked the beginning of the nationwide Gay Pride movement. Okay, so the reason why it's more significant is because of the press coverage it got. The difference between this riot, and it lasted about 5 non-consecutive nights. They were very close to local newspapers. News crews got a hold of the goings on, and they broadcasted it nationwide and international. So the reason why this is so significant is because more people heard about it when it was happening, and it spread like wildfire. It's also suspected that this is one of the first occurrences that white people actually stepped up and did something instead of allowing our Black siblings to bear all the weight, as had been very well known during the civil rights movement. If Black people were involved, typically white people weren't.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the first major events that white people actually stepped up and did something, which, thank fuck. But that's why this raid was far more significant than prior ones. And this also kind of changed the thought process between gays just existing, right? Which is kind of where we were prior to this. We were trying to be seen, right? And now we're changing the conversation from just you seeing us to you allowing us to live, and we're having pride in ourselves. And we start about a decade later, on the 10th anniversary, is when social justice started becoming a major theme in gay pride, and things like AIDS related issues started being discussed as part of the gay pride movement. And we moved from this idea that we're just here and there's nothing you can do about it to we're here and we're equal to you. And that's how this all went from, gay rights to gay pride in the matter of, a decade. And now we're celebrating the 53rd year of gay pride this month. 53 years of gay pride. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. And at the same time, it is disappointing that it is 2023. And while so much has been advanced, there is still so far to go. We were supposed to be flying cars, right?
It's the backtracking for me in a lot of ways, though. A lot of the legislation going on right now is backtracking. It's taking us back 50 plus years. And that's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Unacceptable.
And like, not to merge topics here, or that we would ever cover this topic, but like all of a sudden we have UFOs and then human rights are being taken away in the next second.
Right.
So why is it suddenly a question to go back in time on all of these things? Like, we're supposed to be better. By now, we're supposed to be better. And there is such a crazy political situation happening where I don't understand how we're not. So what it seemed like to me when you were talking about the riot or the rebellion is that everybody just had a fucking enough.
Had enough.
Why aren't we there? Why haven't we already been there? We should already have a fucking enough. Like, it's not okay to suddenly deem that people aren't people just because two men love each other, or two men just want to have fun together, or two women want to have fun together, or it's none of your business.
Or even to take it a step further. Yeah, or even a step further than that, someone who wants to live as their true authentic self.
Right.
I find myself in a lot of ways privileged because not only am I cisgendered, but I'm also white. So I have a lot of privilege to stand from. My ex is transgendered. Granted, she's white, so she still has some privilege, but she's currently now fighting a battle in the state of Florida for her to maintain her necessary medications to keep herself on the track of fulfilling her wishes to align on the outside with how she feels on the inside. And the fact that it's 2023 and she is an adult over the age of 30 and still has to fight for her right to just exist is absolutely unacceptable to me. And, we have the ability now that we have a lot of power in this country as white people to be able to live easier. There are plenty of people of color that are, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered, and they unfortunately have it coming at them from multiple sides because not only are they disenfranchised because of the color of their skin and their socioeconomic background, but now they also have this other umbrella over their head as well. And you get through one civil rights movement to go into another civil rights movement to go into another civil rights movement, and you're still being affected on all of these different angles just because of who the fuck you are, I think is ridiculous.
And Florida is terrifying. There are so many states that are trying to get these terrifying bills into law. When it first came out, we're gonna talk about child predators, and the death penalty. Oh my gosh. Okay, if you hurt a child, that's probably what you should get. But then you see a little bit deeper into it, and you're like, I see. You're going to start saying that people are hurting children that aren't even remotely doing anything to children, and that's the cross you're going to attach to them to take them down.
And the other thing that's really controversial about that change in the law is that it wasn't even a unanimous decision. something like that, when you change the penalties for a crime, that typically takes a unanimous vote. And it wasn't. And they passed it anyway. And it on the surface, yes, that law seems legit. If you hurt a child, you get the death penalty. That sounds great. But when
And
you start
everybody
classifying,
goes, "Oh, yes, that sounds wonderful." Because who wants children to be hurt and then those
period.
people to be free again?
Right.
Or
Right.
okay, but then there's that little asterisk right there.
Things like drag queens can be considered sex crimes against children. Trans people can be considered sex crimes against children. And sex crimes are now being able to be punishable by death. And so it's a means, it's a distraction in a lot of ways, and it's scary. It's a scary time to be LGBTQIA plus, and I can't imagine what my trans siblings are going through right now. I left Florida before this legislation started happening. I left right before the Don't Say Gay bill was becoming a really big thing, and I wasn't in school, nor do I have children in school. My nieces and nephews are homeschooled, thankfully, but like my niece came out to my dad as having a crush on a girl, and like it's terrifying to think my nieces and nephew are growing up in the same bullshit I grew up in when I was a child. Because I knew I was gay from the way back, but there wasn't, the uh, the access to information and the access to a community much when I was a kid. So I was not out for a long time because it was still looked at as a terrible thing to be gay in Kentucky.
It was interesting after high school to find out that there were people out like an adult that like in high school weren't. And like looking back, it's like, well, number one, I had no idea. Number two, good for them. But and I'm not going to go into too much detail and specify too much, but there was a girl that I went to high school with that I think it was like, yeah, probably. And then as an adult, though, it was a very hush hush thing that she had a wife and she had children, but like, well, we're going to end that because further details can easily be determined who this person is. But it's sad that like you have a spouse and you can't live in a world where you're like posting on social media how happy and your pictures and blah blah blah. And not saying that anybody needs to or that that's a requirement for anything, but it's just like if you wanted to, what kind of backlash would you get? And that's just sad.
Yeah.
Like these are grown consenting people living
Right.
a life.
And and to touch on some of those bills too, there's one in Florida now that if you are allowing your child access to gender affirming care, the child can be taken from you. If someone in your household is receiving gender affirming care, they can take the children. And I know several trans people that have spouses that have children. And
can you touch on what gender affirming care actually is? Because like I know in generalized concept what it is, but like can't women receive gender affirming care and it's just for like women and men for men?
Well, okay, so if you want to just talk about the broad spectrum of gender affirming care, anything that you do to make yourself more aligned
women
with your gender is gender affirming care. So women through menopause who take hormones to fight off the effects of menopause is gender affirming care. Women who get Botox injections, breast augmentation, belly, tummy tucks, butt lifts, all of these things can be considered gender affirming care. Men who take erectile dysfunction medication, men who take testosterone when they get older and not producing as much is considered gender affirming care. But the fact of the matter is these are being geared towards cisgendered people, so they're not the same thing. But if you're talking about like trans affirming care, right, something as simple as therapy is gender affirming care. Hormone blockers, hormone replacement, surgical procedures, of course, are gender affirming
Body
care.
modifications.
Right, but at the root, something as simple as therapy can be considered gender affirming care.
Gotcha.
And that's the scary part, because if you're a child and you have, confusion and, about your gender or your expression or even your sexuality, therapy is a really good way to either confront that and fix it, or for you to realize that this is an actual concern and you do have, gender dysmorphia. And, there is, the treatment for gender dysphoria is transition. That's the treatment, right?
So here's
So,
another question for you, and I don't know that you'll be able to answer this, but what about children that are intersex?
right. So
Like that are born with more than just one gender,
and see,
which
I'm
can
not
happen.
that's a conversation that's being actually happening right now. But the unfortunate thing about intersex people is a lot of times you can't visually tell if someone is intersex. There are
Right.
occurrences in which the physical attributes of the person that is got intersex is visually noticeable, right? But there are a lot of people that are intersex that you can't visually tell. It's a
Mhm.
chromosomal abnormality, and they actually have to test for that in a lot of situations. So the conversations being talked about now, have you had your chromosomes tested? Are you sure that you're a cisgendered woman? Like, I know I haven't had my chromosomes tested. For all I know, I could be intersex. You know what I mean? So
Right.
there's an argument for that as well. But for the people that have physical attributes of being intersex, and the doctors and the parents choosing the gender of that person
Identity. Yeah.
is gender affirming care. And so where is the line going to be drawn, right? And that's the conversation that needs to be had. Like,
Because
when
if you
is it?
cancel it for somebody,
You got to
you
cancel it
would
for
think
everybody.
logically it's canceled for everybody.
Hmm.
And that's
and and the hormone blockers, for example, that some parents have used as a means to help their child with their gender affirming care.
Mhm.
That's being argued right now as well. But there are a lot of parents of cisgendered children that use hormone blockers as well for things like precarious puberty that we talked about in a prior episode. There are, I don't want to say the word many or several or a lot of cisgendered children that hit puberty far too early, and they
There's more
utilize
than
these
one. We'll
right.
say that. There's more than one.
There's more than one, right? They use these hormone blockers as a means to prohibit premature puberty, right? So is that acceptable while keeping a trans girl from hitting male puberty a problem, right? Where is the distinction between gender affirming care and it's acceptable, and when is it not, or is all gender affirming care prohibited? And so that's kind of a sticky situation we find ourselves in right now as far as legislation is concerned, for sure.
I just feel
Scary
like
as fuck.
we should be so much further
Mm-hmm.
down a road than what we are. And why? Because a book written by man a long time ago that's been multiply revisioned
Mm-hmm.
and rewritten
Why?
and mistranslated
Why, Miss
can't for some
Erica?
reason be kept out of government,
Why,
which it's
Miss
supposed to
Erica?
be.
What book could you be talking about?
The KJV.
Girl, the Bible. And the funny thing about King James, this man,
He was afraid
this
of witches. He wrote that whole thing out of fear of witches.
while he was sucking his boyfriend's penis, girl, like, if they only knew about their King James and his version of the Bible, Lord, there'd be a fit.
Okay, I feel like we should take a moment because this is the first time that we have actually had a conversation about LGBTQIA.
Mm-hmm.
And you did confirm that you are a homosexual man.
I am a homosexual. I am.
I am a straight woman.
Mm-hmm. It's okay,
And
baby. You were born that way.
and despite how cute Rob is not interested in taking on lovers at this time.
No.
So just in case any of the audience thinks, oh my gosh, he is just a stud muffin. He is, but he knows it. And he
And he's
doesn't need
not,
anybody to tell him.
and he's emotionally unavailable. Thank you. He is working on him. Thanks.
And that is so beautiful.
And
That is so
despite the
beautiful.
fact that Miss Erica is a heterosexual woman, she is married. And
There's no ring because it's just not there right now. I'm a little too chubby right now, but it'll come back.
so, gentlemen, I'm gonna need you to step off. Thank you. Thank you. And ladies, sorry, girl. Sorry, girl. Anyway, but you had some things that you wanted to talk about in this Pride Month.
So I wanted to do something that is a little heavy.
Mhm.
But I want to also give credit first to Suspiria, a true crime podcast, for the details that I obtained in this research, because this is from a different country and I am not fluent in the language that most of the articles and things were found in. So they are a fantastic podcast to listen to. They went really deep into this, but I didn't want to steal their content.
Mhm.
So I just kind of listened through and picked up important things.
So thank you, Suspira.
Thank you, Suspiria.
We'll put them in the caption so people can find them too.
And their banter is totally precious. They're so cute. Okay, so I want you to first imagine this scenario. On March 2nd, 2012, there's a man being robbed. He happens to be saved from the encounter by two other men. Those men invite the victim out for sopapillas and drinks. They hang out together despite the victim of the robbery being gay openly, and the men being neo-Nazis, and they were known for hating gay people. And then they part ways at 10 p.m. Okay, so in your head already with that scenario, how do you feel about that?
Well, it brings me back to someone I'm going to talk about a little later, because the beginnings of this interaction seem very familiar.
Mhm.
And I am 6 foot tall and I weigh 260 pounds of pure rage. So I don't fear interacting with straight people. I don't prefer it a lot of the time, you know what I mean? But
Okay.
straight men in general, really, a lot of times. I'm not fearful in my interactions with anybody. But there is always that kind of in the background when I'm in a social setting with people I don't know. Are they accepting of the community? Are they bigoted? Are they neo-Nazis? And that's become a very, deep ingrained concern of mine, especially because I do tend to hang around people of color a lot of the time, and especially Spanish speaking people of color. And in the United States, that is not so much a community of people that is, very well welcomed, especially in the areas that I lived in. And so there's always that concern that the person I'm interacting with is a type of person that I shouldn't be interacting with. Am I ever terrified for my life? Very rarely am I terrified for my life, because I will fight you.
So where this scenario took place was in a park in Santiago, Chile.
Chile.
I'm white, and Alabama is not where you learn.
Santiago child.
Santiago child. But so what would happen following that scenario? The victim would be found by a guard at 4 a.m., having been brutally beaten, tortured, and left unconscious. His attack lasted 6 hours. And he was alive. He was taken to the hospital, where doctors noted that the victim had part of his ear cut off. He had a traumatic brain injury. He had broken legs. Swastikas had been carved into his stomach, and cigarette burns were all over his body. He had arrived with no identification, but his name was learned a couple days later when a missing persons report matched his description. The missing persons report had been filed by his family when he failed to return home from a night out. His family identified him as 24-year-old Daniel Zamudio. Did I say that right?
Daniel
Daniel
Zamudio.
Zamudio.
Muy bien.
Daniel was placed in a medically induced coma to help heal, and he did briefly wake up after 5 days, but due to complications, he was placed back into the medically induced coma. He would tragically pass away from his injuries on the 27th of March in 2012. So before we go any further, one of those bits and pieces is not the truth. Do you want to guess which part of what I just read to you was not the truth?
That he briefly woke up?
No, that he was robbed.
Oh,
That he was
Okay.
robbed, and that these men had just invited him out for sopapillas and drinks, and they hung out, and then they left. That was not the truth.
Oh, well, that part was clearly not the truth, because obviously he was beaten to death. Right, yeah. The
Yes.
robbery could have still happened, I would have thought, but and they parted ways. Yeah.
No. So Daniel Zamudio was born to Ivan Zamudio and Jacqueline Vera, August 3rd, 1987 in Santiago, Chile. Daniel came out as gay to his family when he was about 13 years old. When he was 17 years old, he experienced deep heartache when his best friend committed suicide. Now, I couldn't find really any information about the best friend, but I just know that it was mentioned in frequent topics of him. So we're going to include that because I know that kind of pain. Not the suicide part, but I know the pain of losing someone.
Oh, I know intimately the pain of your best friend committing suicide. Yeah.
So loss can really fuck you up. He fell into depression and dropped out of school. But his father tried to encourage him to be productive, to pull through the dark time. And Daniel began working at a clothing store to save up money to go to school for modeling or theater. He had dreams of fame and, in the future, love and a family of his own. He was involved in the local LGBTQ, which is what they said, I assume now it's IA scene, and enjoyed local clubs, despite having been verbally threatened by at least one anti-gay individual while he was out enjoying his community. On Friday, March 2nd, he had informed his mother that he had plans to hang out with his friend after work, but that he would return home afterwards. His mother feared for safety. Again, he had been threatened before. Not just threatened, it was, I'm going to find you and kill you. So not just, ooh, I don't like your kind, I'm going to beat you up. It was pretty heavy. His parents waited a couple days for his return, as he had gone off for the weekend before and everything is fine. But when he still did not return, his family filed a missing persons report, and police connected the description to an unidentified man in a local hospital. They rushed to find their son had been savagely assaulted and violated by a group of men in a park. The family stayed by his side, and March 22nd, doctors informed the family he was brain dead and succumbed to his injuries on March 27th at 7:45 p.m. However, on March 9th, so 7 days later from the initial attack, I'm going to try really hard here, so work with me. Patricio Amata Garay, Alejandro Angulo Tapia, Raul Lopez Fuentes, and Fabian Mora Mora were arrested for the attack on Daniel. Side note, Alejandro Angulo Tapia was a Michael Jackson impersonator. They had confessed to the crime because, of course, it was prior to Daniel's death. All were neo-Nazis, even the Michael Jackson impersonator.
Which is ironic all by itself.
Right. They did not claim to be, but their ideologies and actions said they were. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Raul's confession was that he was out to buy alcohol when he came upon Patricio and Alejandro beating Daniel. He had been sleeping on a bench at 9 p.m. Patricio and Alejandro were hitting Daniel on the head with their hands as if to wake him, but the hitting became harder and they grabbed him and invited him for some drinks. The way that Suspiria put it was in a way that was like invited him for some drinks, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm pretty sure it was like forcing someone, you know, to do something that they didn't want to do necessarily. And just whatever, shoving alcohol. Roll claims he left again to buy the alcohol. When he returned, Patricio was kicking Danielle, hitting him in the head, his genitals, his arms, his legs, all over. Danielle was bleeding from his nose and face, and at this point, a Pisco Sour glass bottle was broken and used to carve a swastika into Danielle's stomach. Fabian weaponized a 16-pound rock and threw it on Danielle's hips and legs repeatedly, and reportedly it sounded like chicken bones breaking. The group also urinated on Danielle. Raul claims the group disbanded and left Danielle alone at 2:30 a.m. Saturday, March 3rd. Patricio and Alejandro's confession was that they had saved him from a thief, inviting him to sopapillas and drinks. Alejandro did reject this confession and stated he was threatened to give the matching story by Patricio. Fabian's confession matched Raul's, except that he stated he did not hit Danielle with the rock. They were arrested and charged with attempted murder and held without bail. When Danielle did pass away, the charges changed to murder, obviously. All men were declared by Judge Juan Carlos Urrutia guilty of a crime of extreme cruelty and total disrespect of human life. Patricio was sentenced to life imprisonment. Alejandro and Raul were sentenced to 15 years, and Fabian was sentenced to 7 years due to he cooperated with investigators and his lack of prior convictions. He got the lowered sentence. But what came from Danielle's horrendous attack was an ignited awareness, and pressure was put on Chilean lawmakers to make a change. Originally proposed in 2005 was an anti-discrimination bill that would prevent discrimination towards anyone based on race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender, appearance, or handicap. It had strongly been opposed by the conservative right, the Catholic Church, and other anti-gay marriage groups, which, yeah, right, couldn't be. But the bill was signed into law in early May 2012. I'm going to say this word, and I hope I get it right. Colloquially.
Very good.
Oh my God, first try. Called the Zamudio Law. It is the first piece of legislation in Chile. I'm sorry, hold on. I'm really proud of myself. Chilean history to comprehensively protect the LGBT community. It has set a precedent in the continued fight for equality in Chile. Now, again, I was limited on really the in-depth that I could go on this just because I do not speak, the language that the articles came out in. And I did not want to take an entire episode from, another podcast. But I think it is a tragedy that people have to learn right and wrong from someone having to die. Like, it should not take people having to be killed for there to be such a uprising. And, I'm glad that the changes are happening, that they are making a difference in some way. But it's such a shame that this person had to lose their life.
And, one of the scarier parts is that kind of stuff is still happening today. And what I'm going to talk about is very similar to what you're going to talk about. And I don't want any of my trans siblings to feel like we're not talking about you specifically. Trans women, especially trans women of color, are still being, found raped, beaten, and murdered, if they're found at all right now. In 2022, there were 31, I believe, trans women of color that were found beaten. And of those, a lot of the people got off because of a trans panic. And those laws are still on the books. Trans panic laws are still justifiable in a lot of states right now. And that is sickening to me.
Mm-hmm.
sickening to me.
I know that in some of like unidentified cases that come about, there are situations where proper details are not present because without a transition, a physical transition, if a body is found, then they just report on what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people are going unidentified because terrible people do terrible things to these individuals, and their identities are almost lost. We do have so much advancement now with DNA testing and such. So I feel that there's a lot of possibility, and there are companies that can take the tiniest little detail and create your entire story. So there is still hope, but in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, there are situations where people are just unknown and unidentified because there was one person that decided that it was up to them to end this other person's existence, and they did. And one day, hopefully, that will not be something that is just so easily said. But I know that too, in history, law enforcement, like for example, with prostitution, sex workers, they're less than human. These people are considered less than human, and their existence just does not have a weight to be, solved. And that's so sad. That should never be a thing. Indigenous people face the same discrimination, and it's what good does that bring to somebody to hurt somebody in such a way like that?
Animals.
I mean, it's not even animals. It's less than animals.
There aren't words. These
It's
types of people, they're
just
gross.
monster.
Fucking gross. A case that stuck out to me, because it's something I remember being young. I was 12 when this happened. And, when you're 12, you're finding out a lot about yourself. And, Matthew Shepard is a case that I carry with me all the time. And for those of us that don't know who Matthew Shepard is, he was born December 1st, 1976. He's only 10 years older than me. He was, as I said, born December 1st, 1976. He was a gay American student at the University of Wyoming. Now, the history of Matthew Shepard is kind of all over the place. His parents lived everywhere. His dad got a job overseas, and he spent a lot of his growing up at an American school in Switzerland. He did have depression issues. He was raped and beaten when he was younger, and that did lead to depression issues, and some say chemical dependency in some areas. But the thing I want to talk about Matthew Shepard, is not so much where he came from, but the fact that he was a gay college student. And on the night of October 6th in 1998, Shepard was approached by Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson at Fireside Lounge in Laramie County, Wyoming. All three men were in their early 30s. McKinney and Henderson offered to give Shepard a ride home. They subsequently drove to a remote rural area and proceeded to rob, pistol whip, and torture Shepard. We're going to talk into some detail here in a moment. The thing that people have said after the fact, especially during the court case and witness testimony, is these two men alluded to the fact that they were gay because they knew Matthew Shepard was gay. And so they proceeded to rob, pistol whip, and torture him, tying him to a barbed wire fence and leaving him to die. Many media reports contained the graphic account of the pistol whipping and his fractured skull. Reports described how Shepard was beaten so brutally that his face was completely covered in blood, except where his tears cleared the blood off. So he was beaten so badly that the only whiteness of his skin that was left is where his tears traced his face. The assailant's girlfriends testified that neither McKinney nor Henderson were under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time of the attack. McKinney and Henderson testified that they learned of Shepard's address and intended to steal from his home as well after attacking Shepard and leaving him tied to the fence in near freezing temperatures. Mind you, this is October in Wyoming. It's cold, right? McKinney and Henderson returned to town, proceeded to pick a fight with two men, a 19-year-old Emiliano Morales and an 18-year-old Jeremy Herrera. The fight resulted in head wounds for both Morales and McKinney. Police officer Flint Waters arrived at the scene of the fight. He arrested Henderson, searched McKinney's truck, and found a blood-smeared gun along with Shepard's shoes and credit cards. Henderson and McKinney later tried to persuade their girlfriends to provide alibis for them and help them dispose of the evidence. Still tied to the fence, Shepard was in a coma 18 hours after the attack when he was discovered by Aaron Crayfields, a cyclist who initially mistook Shepard for a scarecrow. Reggie Flutie, the first police officer to arrive at the scene, found Shepard alive but covered in blood. Shepard was transported to Edmondson Memorial Hospital in Laramie before being moved to a more advanced trauma ward at Poudre Valley Hospital in Fort Collins, Colorado. He had suffered fractures to the back of his head and in front of his right ear. He experienced severe brainstem damage, which affected his body's ability to regulate his heart rate, body temperature, and other vital functions. There was also about a dozen small lacerations around his head, face, and neck. His injuries were deemed too severe for doctors to operate. Shepard never regained consciousness and remained in full life support. While he lay in intensive care and in the days following the attack, candlelight vigils were held in countries around the world. Shepard was pronounced dead 6 days after the attack on October 12, 1998. He was just 21 years old. McKinney and Henderson were arrested and initially charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. After his death, the charges were upgraded from attempted murder to first degree, which meant that the two defendants were eligible for the death penalty. Their girlfriends, Kristen Price and Chastity Paisley, were charged with being accessories after the fact. And at McKinney's November 98 pretrial hearing, Sergeant Rob Debris testified that McKinney had stated in an interview on October 9th that he and Henderson identified Shepard as a robbery target and pretended to be gay to lure him out of their truck, and that McKinney had attacked Shepard after Shepard had put his hand on McKinney's knee. Detective Ben Fitzen testified that Price stated McKinney told her that the violence against Shepard was triggered by how McKinney felt about gays. In December of 98, Paisley pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. On April 5th, 99, Henderson avoided going to trial when he pleaded guilty to murder and kidnapping charges. In order to avoid the death penalty, he agreed to testify against McKinney and was sentenced by District Judge Jeffrey A. Donnell to 2 consecutive life terms. At Henderson's sentencing, his lawyers argued that Shepard had not been targeted because he was gay. Right. McKinney's trial took place in October and November 99. Prosecutor Cal Rarucha alleged that McKinney and Henderson pretended to be gay to gain Shepard's trust. Price, McKinney's girlfriend, testified that Henderson and McKinney had pretended they were gay to get Shepard in the truck to rob him. McKinney's lawyer attempted to put forward a gay panic defense, arguing that McKinney was driven to temporary insanity by alleged sexual advances by Shepard. This defense was rejected by the judge. McKinney's lawyer stated that the two men wanted to rob Shepard but never intended to kill him. Verruccio argued that the killing had been premeditated, driven by greed and violence, rather than by Shepard's sexual orientation. The jury found McKinney not guilty of premeditated murder, but guilty of felony murder, and began to deliberate on the death penalty. Shepard's parents brokered a deal that resulted in McKinney receiving 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Henderson and McKinney were incarcerated in the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rowlands and were later transferred to other prisons because of overcrowding. Following her testimony at McKinney's trial, Price pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor interference with a police officer. Shepard's murder brought national and international attention to hate crime legislation at both the state and federal levels. In October 2009, the United States Congress passed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which is colloquially referred to as the Matthew Shepard Act, or Shepard-Byrd Act for short. On October 28, 2009, President Barack Obama signed the legislation into law. Following her son's murder, Judy Shepard became a gay rights activist and established the Matthew Shepard Foundation. Shepard's murder has inspired films, novels, plays, songs, and other work.
I love you, Hobie.
Love you too. I remember watching that trial on TV when I was a young teenager. Scary. And it did a lot for, protections, gay rights protections in this country, which is, important. And his mom has done amazing things for the community, both gay and trans people alike. So some good did come from that monstrosity, and both of his murderers will be in prison for the rest of their life. So that's something, at least. Womp, womp, womp. That got deep.
Well, we knew planning this that it was going to be one of our heaviest.
Yes.
But these are very important things to talk about. There is so much misinformation and so much propaganda that's being spewed as truth.
It's crazy, and the battle is ongoing, and that's unfortunate. Yes, as a community, the LGBTQI plus has, grown, and we do have rights today that we didn't have before. We can get married now, which growing up, I never thought possible. I'm not even going to lie. I never thought possible we'd be able to get married. I remember protesting when I lived in San Francisco for college, the Prop 8 bill, when it hit California. I wasn't even a California resident. I was a student that lived in California. I still had my Kentucky driver's license. And I was protesting Proposition 8 back in 2008 in California. And, then it got overturned, and that was devastating. And then I lived in Kentucky again, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that as states were becoming, statewide legalization, Kentucky would not be one of them states until it became federally, mandated. But, now they're redoing all the laws, and it's not going to be long before they change their focus from trans people and bring it to gay people again. And we need to stand in solidarity with our trans siblings, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be where we are today. And it won't stop with them. And I think that's something that we really need to make sure people truly understand. It's not just a trans issue. It's a community-wide issue. Their fight is our fight. And the fact that people are segregating themselves from that community sickens me to my core. So the fight continues, and we just have to stand and, take a stand for something. And drag is not a crime, like your shirt says. Drag is not a crime.
Drag is an art form.
And I'm wearing my Death Card tarot shirt because it's significant.
That shirt so much.
Significant changes need to happen. We need deep intrinsic change. Deep intrinsic change.
Agreed.
Did you have anything else to talk about, or no?
I don't know. Here's the phrase that comes to my mind is, I don't know what else to say. Because it's like the difference between right and wrong. But even as simple as like, okay, for example, Target. Target has been put in this spotlight because of their Pride collection, right? And there are people that are construing these items that they sell to be these things of the devil and of horrendous purpose. And it's like, okay, look, if it's not for you, that's okay. It's just not for you. You don't have to hate on it simply because it's not for you.
Right.
But there are so many people that have a voice right now. And yet the voices that matter are being drowned out by voices that are nothing but hate.
And that's how our society has been
forever.
Pretty much from the get-go. Yeah.
Forever. And it's like, if people can't see right now the threat to everyday life for themselves,
For
they
everyone.
need to wake up. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just trans people that are under attack. It won't just be gay people that are under attack.
No.
It's not just women that are going to be under attack.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of these different people in these different communities. But it's like there is something happening right now in the US that is so big and so fucking scary. And if you think that you're exempt from whatever these changes are that are coming or that are happening, for right now, today, you might be okay. But tomorrow, it could turn just like that. And it's you. You are now being violated some way. You are having rights taken away.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before with abortions and children, and abortions being taken away from childbearing individuals, women, anybody that's got a uterus that can make a baby. And you have to give specific reasons as to why. You have to be on the verge of death. It doesn't matter now if you're a child that's had, a rape or incest, or it doesn't matter. And trans people, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are a 10-year-old child that's just been discovered that you might be interested in a different gender. It doesn't matter. And it's like, okay, for right now, you have a voice. And if you're spewing hate, just give it a couple days. It's going to come around to you. It'll be on your front porch.
And there's a saying that goes, I wasn't there for the Jews when they were attacked. I wasn't there for the blacks when they were attacked. I wasn't there for the gays when they were attacked. Now I'm being attacked, and there's no one here for me. Yeah. And that's kind of, a scary reality, but like ultimately that's what's going to happen is, people think that this is just a one-sided issue and that it won't affect everybody. At its root, everyone knows at least one trans person, and it could very well be somebody that they love. Everyone knows at least one gay person, and it could very well be somebody that they love. And the fact that this isn't a conversation that a lot of people are prepared to have is sad. It's a reality of our truth. It's a reality of the situation, and it's not getting any better by just standing by and listening.
Or
and
not having an opinion,
right.
Because there is
I'm not gay. It doesn't affect me. I'm not trans. It doesn't affect me. And that's the fucking
or
problem.
I don't know enough about it. Well, learn, because these are very real things. And what's happening is, that Silent Hill franchise and the steam from the town, but it's actually based on some place that like the mines underneath the ground are burning. And so people can't live there anymore. Put that into humanity. Like, it might not be a war that you can physically see, but under the ground, like, there is something happening, and it's going to affect everyone. And it's not a matter of who believes in what being a political party. It's a matter of, this is a person that has a heartbeat just like everybody else, and it's not violating crimes for them to live their identity.
Right.
And whose laws are they violating by loving somebody or just wanting to be their person? What laws are those breaking? If they are not what this country was founded on, church and state being separate,
right,
then it's not really a law.
And, and I also just kind of want to beat a dead horse and bring back this idea of indoctrination of children. I grew up in Kentucky. There wasn't a lot of gay anything in my education. There wasn't a lot of gay on TV. There wasn't any of these, don't say gay bills in place. And I still grew up fabulous. So education and allowing someone to know that they exist and that what they're feeling isn't wrong or evil is not indoctrination, it's education, and that's different.
Right.
And I am sickened to death that people have this argument that, you know, the LGBTQIA plus community is indoctrinating their children as if we're fucking having membership drives. That
You know what
like,
boggles me? What boggles me is when people talk about drag shows. And it's like, okay, there are drag shows that are for adults.
yes.
Yes. There are also situations where there will be people in drag that are around children. But the act of a person in drag being around a child is not child abuse. It's not them molesting a child. If people understood what went into dressing up and drag.
Right. And unfortunately, I wish it were just a drag situation. But
Yeah.
these laws were written in such a way that it's targeting transgender
Anybody.
people and gender non-conforming, non-binary people. There are some states where being transgender in public is against the law now because it's considered child abuse. And that is disgusting.
I mean,
and drag has been going on for millennia. Like,
back in the day, there were no women actresses.
None.
They were men in drag to put on entertainment for kings and queens and whatever that were not, you know. I mean, there was nothing to it. It just was a thing. Mm-hmm. Men designed lingerie. Women didn't do that. Men were involved in
Victoria's
dresses.
Secret is still owned by a man. Okay, like that's the secret of Victoria's Secret. Like,
I think that there is so much deeper to the one side that is so shocking and terrifying, and control for what? What is happening that they need to annihilate, eliminate a group of people? Control. Like what? Anyway, I am so thankful that I have you in my life.
Ditto.
I think you are absolutely fantastic and fabulous. Every bit of you is just perfection. Perfection.
Stop it.
But if I've said that I was not afraid for you in daily life, I know that you're not afraid of things. And I know that you are a big fella and like you can handle your own. But I just know that there are terrible, terrible people, and this is a terrible thing going on. And it's just scary. And I know that you have worries about your ex. And I also want to say that your ex being a trans woman does not take away from me being a woman at all.
Right.
I've not lost anything from that.
And that's the thing that's confusing to me. A lot of even my trans guy friends, like, they're dudes, you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. I'm not a woman, so I can't speak on women's issues or, women's thoughts, but like, I have so many amazing trans friends, and not a single ounce of their life affects mine, except for the fact that they are amazing friends. Like, I don't understand this thought process that because they want to live their authentic truth, that somehow demasculinizes me or somehow takes some kind of manhood away from me. Like, and, I would have to conversely then say the same thing about trans women. What is it about them embracing their womanhood that is so detrimental to cisgendered women and their womanhood? Like, it doesn't affect me. Doesn't do anything. Doesn't do anything except for, oh, wow, she's prettier than some of you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't understand. I am still sickened that one of my friends, I'm not going to name drop, has a better beard than I do. Not only is he only 25, but, he created his beard because he went through transition, and his genetics are just so on point that this man's beard is magnificent. He can braid it, and I'm over here like I'm almost 40 and it's still patchy as fuck. like
just get you a wig and cut the pieces off and just glue them.
right, and just kind of like, or just get some spray
Like
and line it up.
False eyelashes, but just layer them.
Layer them, right? Shingle.
Shingle.
But yeah, so this was a great conversation, and I'm just not even going to start spoiling what next episode's going to be. They're just going to have to like check us out and see next episode.
But I will say this much though: are we going to be together in the same room for the next episode?
I just you don't give them. Oh, hang on. Yes, we will be together.
Oh my goodness! Look at that sweet baby.
But the mascot won't be.
Yes,
I think we will be in the same room.
How exciting!
Our next recording. Yes.
Everyone has now been blessed by Ramses, and we can all just live our best life.
Everybody, for those of you that are listening and not watching, this is my cat, His Infernal Majesty, King Ramses II. For those of you that are watching, this is Ram Ram. Okay. But yeah.
My gosh, I've missed that kitty cat.
Yes. He misses you guys too. Well, we just need to stop getting banned on TikTok, don't we? So yeah, anyway, but we will catch you guys again next time.
Thanks for joining us. We love y'all, sweet pumpkins. Stay safe, and remember
to fix your mouth.